There's an island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean where forests from the age of dinosaurs still breathe, where water defies gravity through channels carved into mountainsides by prisoners and convicts, and where every New Year's Eve, the sky erupts in what was once certified as the largest fireworks display on Earth. This isn't a legend. This isn't mythology. This is Madeira. 600 miles southwest of mainland Portugal, rising from the abyssal depths of the Atlantic like a volcanic cathedral, Madeira shouldn't exist. Not really, not the way it does. Because this island, this speck of land in an ocean that could swallow it whole, has managed to preserve something most of the world lost millions of years ago. It has become home to one of the most ingenious water distribution systems ever conceived by human hands. And it has transformed itself into a destination that pulls nearly 1 million visitors each year to witness its impossible beauty. But here's what makes Madeira truly extraordinary. Almost nobody saw it coming. When Portuguese explorers João Gonçalves Zarco and Tristan Vaz Teixeira stumbled upon these islands in 1419, they weren't looking for paradise. They were lost, blown off course during a storm, desperately scanning the horizon for any sign of salvation. What they found was a small island they named Porto Santo, Holy Harbour, because it saved their lives. The next year, they returned. And that's when they saw it. Rising from the morning mist like something from a fever dream, an island so densely forested that not a single patch of ground was visible, trees so thick, so ancient, so impossibly green that the explorers could barely believe their eyes. They called it Madeira, Wood Island, because that's all they could see, an endless ocean of primordial forest covering every inch of volcanic rock. What those explorers didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that they were looking at a living museum, a botanical time capsule. The laurel forests that blanketed Madeira were survivors from the Tertiary period, a type of subtropical rainforest that once covered southern Europe 15 to 40 million years ago. By the time humans discovered Madeira, these forests had vanished from the mainland, wiped out by ice ages and climate shifts. But on this isolated volcanic peak in the middle of the Atlantic, protected by ocean currents and blessed with perpetual moisture from trade winds, the ancient world persisted. Today, that forest, the Laurisilva, covers 20% of Madeira's landscape, 15,000 hectares of living prehistory. In 1999, UNESCO declared it a World Heritage Site, recognizing it as the largest surviving area of primary laurel forest on Earth. 90% of it has never been cut. Some of the trees are over 800 years old, growing since before the island was settled. Walking through the Laurisilva isn't just a hike, it's time travel. But Madeira's story isn't just about what nature created, it's about what humans did with it. Because when those first settlers arrived in 1425, they faced an impossible challenge. The island was mountainous, violently so, peaks rising over 6,000 feet from sea level, carved into deep gorges and razor-sharp ridges by millions of years of volcanic activity and erosion. The northern side of the island was drenched in rain, fed by moisture-laden winds from the northeast. The southern side, where settlers wanted to live and farm, was dry as bone. Water was everywhere and nowhere at once. So the Portuguese did something audacious, something that would take centuries to complete and would require levels of engineering and human endurance that seem almost superhuman by today's standards. They built the levadas. Starting in the 15th century and continuing into the 20th, workers carved a network of irrigation channels into the mountainsides of Madeira. Not 10 kilometers, not 100. Over 3,000 kilometers of man-made waterways, winding along cliff faces, diving through 40 kilometers of hand-dug tunnels through solid basalt, following the contours of the mountains with precision that would be impressive today and was nothing short of miraculous then. Many of the workers were convicts and criminals from mainland Portugal, tasked with one of the most dangerous jobs imaginable. They dangled from ropes on sheer cliff faces, chiseling channels into rock with hand tools, sometimes falling to their deaths in the gorges below. The tunnels they dug were pitch black, suffocating, prone to collapse. But they kept digging, for centuries. Why? Because water meant life. Water meant agriculture, and agriculture meant sugar. By the second half of the 15th century, Madeira had become one of Europe's largest producers and exporters of sugar. The levadas made it possible, carrying water from the rain-soaked mountains to the sun-baked plantations in the south. Later, they would power mills and hydroelectric plants. Today, they provide drinking water to the entire island and have transformed into a vast network of hiking trails that draw adventurers from around the world. The levadas are still functioning, still maintained, still carrying water exactly as they were designed to do 600 years ago. But water wasn't the only thing Madeira learned to transform. In the 16th century, the island began producing wine. Nothing special at first, a light dry white that spoiled easily. But Madeira was a critical port for ships traveling to the Americas and the East Indies. Captains would load casks of wine as provisions, fortifying them with a splash of brandy to keep them from spoiling on the long voyage through tropical heat. Then something strange happened. When a shipment of wine was returned to Madeira after crossing the equator 4 times, the producers discovered it hadn't spoiled. It had improved, dramatically. The heat, the motion of the waves, the oxidation during the voyage, all of it had transformed the wine into something richer, more complex, unlike anything else in the world. Madeira wine was born. Today, that fortification and heat aging process is replicated in wine lodges across the island using methods called estufagem and cantero. The result is a wine that is virtually indestructible, capable of aging for centuries. Bottles from the 1800s are still drinkable. Some call it the immortal wine, but we're just getting started. Because the story of Madeira isn't just about forests and water and wine. It's about a place that refused to be defined by its isolation. A place that turned obstacles into opportunities. A place where the impossible became routine. To understand Madeira, you need to understand volcanoes, not the ones you see in disaster movies, the explosive, civilization-ending monsters that dominate our nightmares, the ones that build worlds. 5 million years ago, deep beneath the Atlantic Ocean, the Earth's crust began to crack. Magma pushed through the African tectonic plate, erupting from vents on the ocean floor nearly 20,000 feet below the surface. Layer by layer, eruption by eruption, a mountain began to rise. For millions of years, it grew in darkness, adding height beneath crushing ocean pressure, until finally, sometime during the Miocene epoch, its peak broke the surface. Madeira was born as fire meeting water. The volcano kept building. More eruptions, more layers of basalt and ash and scoriae, creating a stepped relief that would eventually rise over 6,000 feet above sea level. The island that emerged was asymmetrical, steep, dramatic. The northern face fell away in near vertical cliffs. The southern slope was gentler but still formidable. Deep V-shaped valleys carved by water and time radiated from the central ridge like the spokes of a wheel. The most recent volcanic activity on Madeira happened just 6,500 years ago, yesterday in geological time, creating new cinder cones and lava flows on the western part of the island. But even as the volcanic fires cooled, the island was already being shaped by something else. Something that would define its character forever. Water. Because Madeira sits directly in the path of the northeast trade winds, moist air slams into the island's northern mountains, forced upward by the terrain, cooling as it rises, releasing its moisture in a near-constant deluge. The northern valleys receive over 1,500 millimeters of rain per year, some areas even more. The mountainsides are perpetually shrouded in mist and cloud, creating conditions similar to a greenhouse. Humid, temperate, perfect for certain types of vegetation. This is where the Laurisilva took root. Sometime millions of years ago, seeds arrived on Madeira. perhaps carried by birds migrating between Africa and Europe, perhaps floating on ocean currents, perhaps blown by wind across hundreds of miles of open water. However they arrived, they found an environment that no longer existed on the European mainland. The ice ages that would scour northern Europe and dramatically alter southern Europe left Madeira untouched. The island was too far south, too warmed by ocean currents, too stable in its subtropical microclimate. So the ancient forests persisted and evolved. Today, the Laurisilva of Madeira contains species found nowhere else on Earth. At least 76 vascular plant species are endemic to the island, meaning they evolved here in isolation and exist only within these forests. The biodiversity is staggering. Rare lichens and mosses coat ancient tree trunks. Ferns, over 70 species of them, carpet the forest floor. The till tree, the barbusano, the vinhatico, all members of the laurel family, all with leaves that remain dark green year-round, capturing every available bit of light in the dense forest canopy. The forest creates its own weather. Fog condenses on the leaves, dripping constantly, feeding streams that cascade down the mountainsides in spectacular waterfalls. Some of these waterfalls drop 100 meters without breaking, plunging into pools of crystal-clear water that eventually flow to the sea. The Laurisilva acts as a massive sponge, capturing moisture from the air, storing it in the soil, releasing it slowly through springs and streams that feed the entire island. Without the Laurisilva, Madeira, as we know it, could not exist. But the forest isn't just a water factory, it's a living ark. In the shadows of the laurel trees lives one of Madeira's most iconic residents, the trocaz pigeon, known locally as the pombo trocaz. This bird is found nowhere else on Earth. It evolved here, adapted to the forest, and now depends on it completely. Dark plumage, a distinctive silvery patch on the neck, a haunting call that echoes through the mist. Conservation efforts have stabilized the population, but it remains vulnerable, a reminder that this ecosystem exists on a knife's edge. Then there's the Madeiran firecrest, one of Europe's smallest birds, flitting through the branches, its crown flashing gold and orange as it hunts insects in the canopy. The Madeiran chaffinch, with its vibrant plumage, calling from the treetops. Countless invertebrate species, many still being discovered and catalogued by scientists, crawling through the leaf litter, flying through the understory, contributing to food webs that have remained largely intact for millennia. This is what makes the Laurisilva so scientifically valuable. It's not just old, it's functional. The ecological processes here, pollination, predation, decomposition, nutrient cycling, continue as they have for millions of years. The forest is a working laboratory of evolution, showing us what European ecosystems looked like before humans arrived to clear the land. Researchers from around the world come to study it. The Madeira Botanical Garden conducts ongoing research on endemic species, working to understand their biology and preserve them for future generations. Between 1992 and 1995, scientists conducted an exhaustive ecological survey using transects and over 1,100 study sites, documenting the forest's structure, composition, and health. The results were published and have become foundational texts for understanding subtropical laurel forests globally. But the forest faces threats. Invasive species are the most persistent problem. Non-native plants and animals introduced to Madeira, either accidentally or intentionally, compete with endemic species, sometimes outcompeting them entirely. Acacias, for instance, grow aggressively and can dominate areas where native vegetation once thrived. Controlling these invasive species requires constant vigilance, regular removal efforts, and significant resources. Then there's fire. Climate change is increasing temperatures and altering rainfall patterns, creating conditions where fires, once rare in the humid Laurisilva, are becoming more frequent and more severe. In 2010, Madeira experienced catastrophic floods and mudslides that killed dozens of people and caused massive damage across the island. The event was a wake-up call, prompting improved fire prevention measures, enhanced monitoring, and better emergency response capabilities. Water demand is another concern. As Madeira's population grows and tourism expands, the need for water increases. More water drawn from the forest means less flowing through the ecosystem, potentially affecting plant and animal species that depend on consistent moisture. It's a delicate balance, providing for human needs while preserving the natural systems that make life on the island possible. Despite these challenges, the Laurisilva remains in good condition. Monitoring programs track the health of key species. Conservation projects work to control invasives and restore damaged areas. Forestry police patrol the protected zones, enforcing regulations designed to minimize human impact. The forest is part of Madeira's natural park, which encompasses much of the island's interior, ensuring legal protection and management oversight. And here's the fascinating part. Humans have been part of this landscape for 600 years without destroying it. When settlers arrived in 1425, they could have done what humans have done everywhere else: clear the forest, claim the land, exploit every resource until nothing remained. And they did clear some of it. The lower elevations, the more accessible valleys, the areas suitable for agriculture. But the interior, the steep gorges, the remote highlands, the impenetrable wilderness, they left alone. Not out of environmental consciousness, but out of practicality. It was simply too difficult, too dangerous, too remote to be worth the effort. That pragmatic neglect saved the forest. And then something remarkable happened. The settlers found a way to use the forest without destroying it: the levadas. Instead of cutting down the trees to access the water, they built channels around them, through them. The levadas wind through the Laurisilva, following the contours of the land, carrying water from the highlands to the coast. Today, these channels double as hiking trails, allowing visitors to penetrate deep into the forest without damaging it. The narrow paths alongside the levadas are just wide enough for single-file walking. They require no grading, no bulldozers, no deforestation. They work with the landscape rather than against it. This is the genius of Madeira's relationship with its environment, not domination, but collaboration. The island's geography forced creativity. The isolation demanded self-sufficiency. The challenges bred innovation. And the result is a place where ancient ecosystems and human ingenuity coexist, where you can walk for hours through forests unchanged since the tertiary period while following waterways built by 15th century Portuguese convicts. It's a paradox that shouldn't work, but on Madeira, it does. Because Madeira has always been about turning impossibility into opportunity, about looking at obstacles, isolation, mountains, drought, volcanic rock, and finding solutions that not only work, but become defining characteristics. The levadas aren't just irrigation channels, they're symbols of human persistence. The wine isn't just a beverage, it's proof that sometimes disasters create masterpieces. And the island itself, it's not just a destination, it's a lesson in what happens when humans respect the limits of their environment while refusing to be limited by it. The colonization of Madeira began not with triumph, but with desperation. King João IV of Portugal issued the order around 1425, settle the island, make it productive, turn this remote volcanic rock into something useful for the Portuguese crown. The first families came from the Algarve, Portugal's southern coast. Then came settlers from the north. But they weren't volunteers seeking adventure. Many were people of modest means with little to lose. Some were former prisoners, given a choice between continued imprisonment and a one-way voyage to an unknown island in the middle of the Atlantic. They arrived to find paradise and hell occupying the same space. The climate was perfect, subtropical, mild year-round, with temperatures rarely dropping below 15 degrees Celsius even in winter. The soil, enriched by millions of years of volcanic activity, was phenomenally fertile. Rain fell abundantly, at least on the northern slopes. The potential was obvious, but so were the problems. The entire island was covered in forest so dense that sunlight barely reached the ground. Before any crops could be planted, before any settlements could be built, the forest had to be cleared. So the settlers did what humans have done since the invention of fire. They burned it. The fires were meant to be controlled, manageable. But the forests were ancient, thick with deadfall and undergrowth, bone dry in places despite the overall humidity. Once the flames took hold, they spread. According to legend, and there's debate about how much is legend versus history, the fires burned for 7 years. Whether that's literally true or an exaggeration born from the trauma of those early years, one thing is certain: vast areas of Madeira's lower elevations were cleared, transformed from primordial forest into arable land. The cleared areas revealed volcanic soil of extraordinary richness. The settlers planted everything they could think of. Wheat grew abundantly. By the mid-15th century, Madeira was producing enough grain to export back to mainland Portugal. Vegetables thrived. Fruit trees adapted quickly. But the real economic breakthrough came from a crop that would define Madeira's history for over a century: sugarcane. Prince Henry, the navigator, the driving force behind Portuguese exploration, understood the economic potential immediately. Sugar was among the most valuable commodities in Europe, worth more per pound than many precious metals. Demand far exceeded supply. The few places capable of growing it, Sicily, parts of Spain, couldn't produce enough to satisfy European appetites. But Madeira, with its rich soil, abundant water, and year-round warmth, was perfect. The first canes were planted in the 1450s. Within decades, Madeira had become one of Europe's largest sugar producers. But there was a problem. Sugarcane is extraordinarily thirsty. It requires massive amounts of water consistently throughout its growing cycle. The southern slopes where the plantations were located, the areas with the most sun, the gentlest terrain, the best access to the coast, were naturally dry. The northern slopes had all the water, but were too steep, too cloudy, too difficult for large-scale agriculture. This is where the levadas were born. The first channels were simple, short diversions from streams, maybe a few hundred meters long, channeling water to nearby fields. But as the sugar industry expanded, the need for water became desperate. Plantation owners began funding longer, more ambitious channels. Workers carved them into hillsides, following the contours to maintain a gentle downward gradient. The principle was simple. Water flows downhill, but if you keep the grade shallow enough, you can move water horizontally across vast distances before it drops. The execution was anything but simple. Building a levada meant working on cliff faces where a single misstep meant death. It meant chiseling channels through solid basalt using hand, tools, hammers, chisels, picks. It meant digging tunnels through mountains in total darkness, never certain if the rock above would hold or collapse. It meant working in conditions that were humid, cold, treacherous, and exhausting. Many of the workers were convicts, sentenced to labor on the levadas as punishment for crimes committed on the mainland. Records from the period describe men suspended on ropes, dangling over gorges hundreds of meters deep, carving inch by inch into rock faces. Cave-ins were common, falls were common, death was common. But the levadas grew. By the end of the 15th century, a network of channels crisscrossed the island, carrying water from the rainy north to the sugar plantations of the south. The system worked so well that Madeira's sugar production exploded. By the second half of the 15th century, the island was exporting thousands of tons annually to markets across Europe. Wealthy merchants built mansions in Funchal. The city grew rapidly. Money poured in. The sugar boom made Madeira one of the wealthiest regions in the Portuguese Empire. But like all booms, it couldn't last forever. By the late 16th century, Brazil, another Portuguese colony with even better conditions for sugar production and access to enslaved labor on a massive scale, began dominating the market. Madeira's sugar industry declined, unable to compete with the sheer scale of Brazilian production. The plantations contracted. The economic engine that had driven the island for over a century sputtered. The levadas, however, remained, because water is always valuable. As sugar declined, other crops took its place. Vineyards spread across the island, particularly on the southern slopes. The vines were trained on low trellises or pergolas, creating the distinctive appearance still visible across Madeira today. wine production became increasingly important, and by the 17th century, Madeira wine was establishing itself as a distinct product. The wine initially wasn't fortified. It was a light, dry white, pleasant enough, but unremarkable. It spoiled easily, especially during long sea voyages. Winemakers began adding small amounts of distilled alcohol, initially made from cane sugar, a remnant of the sugar boom, to stabilize it. The fortification helped, but the wine still wasn't particularly special. Then came the discovery that would change everything. Madeira's location made it an essential stopping point for ships traveling between Europe and the New World or East Indies. Ships would anchor in Funchals Harbour to take on fresh water, food, and wine. The wine was loaded into casks and stored in the holds, often used as ballast to stabilize the ships. During voyages that could last months, the wine was subjected to extraordinary conditions. The temperature in a ship's hold crossing the tropics could exceed 45 degrees Celsius. The constant motion of the waves agitated the barrels. The wine oxidized as air seeped through the wooden staves. Everything about the journey should have ruined the wine. Instead, it improved it. When a shipment of unsold wine returned to Madeira after a round trip to India, crossing the equator 4 times, spending months in tropical heat, the producers tasted it out of curiosity. They were astonished. The wine had developed a rich, complex flavor profile unlike anything they'd tasted before. The heat had caramelized the sugars. The oxidation had added nutty, dried fruit characteristics. The aging had smoothed the rough edges, creating something sophisticated and distinctive. The wine had accidentally undergone a transformation that winemakers would spend the next 2 centuries trying to deliberately replicate. These heat-aged wines became known as vinho da roda, wine of the round voyage. For decades, producers actually shipped barrels of wine to India and back for the sole purpose of improving them through the voyage. It was expensive and inefficient, but it worked. The wines commanded premium prices. Demand grew. By the 18th century, Madeira wine was famous across Europe and the Americas. It was the preferred drink of the American colonial elite. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin all consumed it regularly. When the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776, tradition holds that the founders toasted with Madeira wine. It was considered sophisticated, refined, a mark of status and taste. But shipping wine on round trips to India was becoming impractical. Steamships shortened voyage times, reducing the aging effect. Costs were prohibitive. Producers needed a way to replicate the heat treatment on land. In 1794, a local physician named Panteleo Fernandes introduced the estufagem method, Portuguese for stewing or greenhouse heating. The idea was simple. If tropical heat improved the wine, create tropical heat in Madeira. Fernandes designed heated rooms where casks of wine could be exposed to high temperatures for extended periods. Modern estufagem uses one of 2 approaches. In the most basic version, wine is placed in large stainless steel or concrete tanks equipped with heating elements. The wine is gradually warmed to about 45 degrees Celsius and held there for 3 to 4 months. This method is fast and economical, used primarily for younger, more affordable Madeiras. The second approach, called armazém de calor, literally heat warehouse, is more sophisticated. Wine is stored in large wooden casks in specially designed rooms outfitted with steam pipes or heating tanks. The room becomes a kind of sauna, heating the wine more gently and evenly. This process can last 6 months to over a year and produces superior results compared to tank heating. But for the finest Madeiras, neither method is used. Instead, producers rely on canteiro, Portuguese for supporting beams or slats. In the canteiro method, wine is aged in wooden barrels placed on racks in lodges, where natural heat from the sun warms the building. The barrels sit under the rafters of warm attics, exposed to the slow, gentle, cyclical heating and cooling that occurs as day turns to night and seasons change. Temperatures can reach 30 degrees Celsius or higher during summer days. Humidity levels fluctuate. The wine ages slowly, naturally, in conditions similar to, but less extreme than, the original sea voyages. Cantero aging requires patience. By regulation, Cantero wines must remain in barrel for a minimum of 2 years before bottling, but the finest examples age for decades. It's not uncommon to find Madeiras that have spent 20, 30, 40 years or more in cask before being released. The result is a wine of extraordinary complexity and longevity. Madeira wine is virtually indestructible. Unlike table wines, which oxidize and spoil once opened, Madeira has already been oxidized as part of its aging process. Opening a bottle doesn't damage it. Some producers and collectors have kept bottles open for months or even years without noticeable deterioration. Properly stored vintage Madeiras from the 18th and 19th centuries are still drinkable and spectacular. There are documented tastings of Madeiras from the 1700s that were vibrant, complex, and delicious. This longevity comes from several factors. The fortification adds stability, boosting alcohol levels to between 17.5 and 21%. The heat treatment accelerates chemical reactions that typically take decades to occur naturally. The high acidity, a defining characteristic of Madeira wine, acts as a preservative, preventing spoilage and adding structure. The result is a wine that improves with age rather than declining. The flavor profile varies depending on the grape variety used. 4 traditional noble grapes define Madeira's style categories. Cercial is the driest, grown in the coolest vineyards at elevations up to 1,000 meters on the north side of the island. It produces wines that are pale, tangy, and austere, with bright acidity and notes of citrus and almonds. Cercial Madeira is typically served slightly chilled as an aperitif. Verdelho is medium dry, slightly richer than Cercial but still refreshing. It shows notes of smoke, nuts, and dried fruit with a velvety texture balanced by acidity. It's versatile enough to work as both aperitif and food wine. Bual, sometimes spelled Boal, is medium sweet, producing rich, dark wines with flavors of caramel, coffee, and dried figs. It's typically served at room temperature and pairs well with cheese or desserts. Malvasia, known in English as Malmsey, is the sweetest and richest, producing luscious wines with intense flavors of toffee, nuts, and dark fruit. It's traditionally served as a dessert wine. For centuries, these 4 noble varieties defined Madeira wine. But in the 20th century, a 5th grape became dominant. Tinta Negra. Originally considered inferior to the noble varieties, Tinta Negra proved remarkably adaptable, capable of producing wines across the entire sweetness spectrum from dry to rich. It's now the most widely planted variety on the island, accounting for the vast majority of production. Regulations require that if a label lists a specific grape variety, the wine must contain at least 85% of that variety. Tinta Negra wines are typically labeled by sweetness level rather than grape name. The wine industry sustained Madeira through difficult periods. When phylloxera, the vine louse that devastated European vineyards in the late 19th century, reached the island, it destroyed most of the vines. Recovery took decades and required replanting with resistant rootstock. Then came wars, economic depressions, political upheavals. But the wine industry persisted, adapting, surviving. Today, Madeira wine remains one of the world's most distinctive and underappreciated treasures, produced by a handful of companies that maintain centuries-old traditions while incorporating modern quality controls. But wine wasn't the only thing that put Madeira on the map. In the 18th and 19th centuries, something unexpected happened. The island became fashionable. Wealthy Europeans discovered that Madeira's climate was extraordinarily beneficial for certain health conditions, particularly tuberculosis and respiratory ailments. The mild temperatures, clean ocean air, and stable humidity seemed to help sufferers recover. Doctors began recommending Madeira as a therapeutic destination. The wealthy and aristocratic started arriving, seeking both health benefits and escape from harsh northern European winters. The British were particularly taken with Madeira. The island had been occupied briefly by Britain during the Napoleonic Wars, a friendly occupation from 1801 to 1802, and again from 1807 to 1814 when Portugal needed protection from potential French invasion. The British presence left a lasting cultural imprint. English became widely spoken among the merchant class. British companies established wine export businesses, and wealthy British families began building grand estates on the island. These weren't modest vacation homes. They were elaborate country houses with formal gardens, imported exotic plants, and architectural styles reflecting British tastes adapted to subtropical conditions. The gardens became particularly renowned, vast landscaped grounds featuring plants from around the world, brought back by travelers and colonial administrators from Asia, Africa, South America, and Oceania. Many of these estates have been converted into hotels, but the gardens remain open to visitors. Walking through them is like touring a botanical collection spanning continents. You'll find species from Brazil beside plants from Indonesia, African succulents growing near Asian orchids, Mediterranean herbs alongside Pacific ferns. The gardens are living testaments to Madeira's role as a way station between worlds, a place where seeds and cuttings from everywhere eventually took root. The influx of wealthy winter residents transformed Funchal from a working port city into a tourist destination. Grand hotels were built to accommodate visitors. The most famous, Reed's Palace, opened in 1891 as Reed's New Hotel. It's still operating today, one of the world's great historic hotels, perched on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic, embodying the elegance of 19th century travel. The tourist industry grew steadily through the 19th and early 20th centuries. Visitors came not just for health reasons, but for the natural beauty, the mild climate, the exotic atmosphere. Madeira offered something rare, a European destination that felt tropical, a Portuguese island that felt international, a remote location that was nonetheless easily accessible by ship. The development of tourism didn't stop the island's agricultural traditions. Alongside vineyards, Madeira cultivated bananas, which thrived in the subtropical climate. The distinctive small Madeira bananas, sweeter and more flavorful than the commercial Cavendish variety, became an important export crop. You'll still see banana plantations terraced on steep slopes throughout the island, the plant's massive leaves creating splashes of bright green against the volcanic rock. Terracing itself became an art form on Madeira. The steep terrain made traditional flat-field agriculture impossible, so farmers carved the hillsides into narrow terraces called poios, held in place by stone walls. Some of these terraces are just a few meters wide, tiny strips of level ground wrested from the mountain, but they work. The walls prevent erosion, retain moisture, and create microclimates where specific crops thrive. The levadas continued to expand throughout this period. By the early 20th century, about 200 levadas totaling roughly 1,000 kilometers crisscrossed the island, but water management remained chaotic. Many levadas were privately owned, controlled by plantation owners or agricultural consortiums. Distribution was often unfair, with wealthy landowners monopolizing access while smaller farmers struggled. Only about 2/3 of the island's arable land was under cultivation, and just half of that was irrigated. In 1939, the Portuguese government finally intervened. A commission was sent to study the situation and propose a solution. What emerged was an ambitious plan. The state would fund construction of major new levadas, creating a coordinated system that could distribute water more equitably while also generating hydroelectric power. The two most important projects were the Levada do Norte and the Levada dos Tornos, both massive undertakings that required tunneling through mountains and building channels along some of the island's most treacherous terrain. Construction continued through the 1940s, 50s and 60s, all done by hand. Workers still dangled from ropes, still dug. Tunnels by hammer and chisel still risked their lives daily. But by 1970, the system was largely complete. The modern levada network comprises over 3,100 kilometers of channels, including approximately 80 kilometers of tunnels. It's one of the most extensive irrigation systems in the world, relative to the size of the territory it serves. Every part of the island has access to water. The system supplies drinking water to all inhabitants, irrigates agriculture across the island, and generates clean hydroelectric power through carefully managed releases from high-altitude reservoirs. And it created something nobody anticipated: a vast network of hiking trails. The maintenance paths alongside the levadas, originally built so workers could access and repair the channels, proved perfect for walking. The levadas followed gentle gradients, winding along hillsides rather than climbing straight up or down. They penetrate deep into the mountains, reaching areas that would otherwise be inaccessible without serious mountaineering skills. And they're everywhere, creating hundreds of kilometers of trails ranging from easy strolls to challenging adventures. In the 1980s, someone recognized the tourism potential. Walking tours began, offering guided levada hikes. Word spread. By the 1990s, levada walking had become one of Madeira's signature attractions, drawing hikers from across Europe and beyond. Each levada offers a different experience. The Levada do Caldeirão Verde, one of the most popular, runs 6.5 kilometers from the Queimadas Forest Park to a stunning waterfall plunging into a green lagoon. The trail passes through several tunnels carved through the rock, flashlights required, and offers dramatic views over deep valleys. The levada clings to cliff faces in places, narrow and exposed, not for those afraid of heights. The Levada das 25 Fontes, 25 springs, leads through the Laurisilva forest to a natural amphitheatre where multiple waterfalls cascade down moss-covered rock faces into a crystal pool. The trail is gentler, more forgiving, suitable for families. The Levada do Rei, the King's Levada, winds through semi-tropical forest, past springs and streams, offering solitude and immersion in the island's primordial landscape. It's less crowded than the famous routes, attracting those seeking quieter experiences. There are levadas for every skill level and interest. Some are paved and wheelchair accessible, others require scrambling over rockfalls and wading through water. Some stay in the open, offering coastal views and sunshine. Others dive into the Laurisilva, dark and mysterious even at midday. The levadas have been proposed for UNESCO World Heritage status in their own right, separate from the Laurisilva. The argument is compelling. They represent an extraordinary achievement of pre-industrial engineering, a functional system that's been operating continuously for 600 years, and a unique cultural landscape that shaped Madeira's development. Whether they receive that designation or not, they've already achieved something more valuable. They've given people a reason to engage with the island's interior, to walk through the forests, to appreciate the landscapes that make Madeira special. But Madeira isn't just about nature and hiking. The island has a vibrant cultural life, rooted in traditions that blend Portuguese heritage with influences absorbed over centuries of contact with travelers from around the world. Music is central to Madeiran identity. Traditional folk music features distinctive instruments, particularly the cavaquinho and rajão, small guitar-like instruments that Portuguese emigrants from Madeira brought to Hawaii in the late 19th century. Those instruments, adapted and refined by Madeiran cabinet makers Manuel Nunes, José do Espírito Santo, and Augusto Dias, became the ukulele. Yes, the ukulele, that quintessentially Hawaiian instrument, has Madeiran roots. When Taini Vaidam, the emigrants disembarked from the SS Ravenscrag in August 1879, a Hawaiian newspaper reported that Madeira Islanders recently arrived here, have been delighting the people with nightly street concerts. The musical connection between Madeira and Hawaii is one of history's stranger threads. Two island cultures separated by most of the globe, connected by migration and music. Traditional Madeiran folk groups still perform at festivals throughout the year, wearing historical costumes and playing music passed down through generations. The songs often relate to daily life, fishing, farming, love, loss, celebration. They're performed at festivals, weddings, and cultural events, keeping traditions alive even as the island modernizes. Festivals punctuate the calendar. The Madeira Flower Festival in spring celebrates the island's botanical abundance with parades featuring floats covered entirely in flowers, carpets of flower petals laid out in intricate designs on city streets, and displays in gardens across the island. The Wine Festival in September honors the grape harvest with traditional grape treading ceremonies, folk music, and of course plenty of wine. The Atlantic Festival in June features fireworks displays, smaller cousins to the New Year's Eve spectacular, synchronized to music, lighting up the bay on weekend nights. But the biggest celebration, the one that defines Madeira in the global imagination, happens on December 31st. The New Year's Eve fireworks show in Funchal is legendary. In 2006, it was certified by Guinness World Records as the largest fireworks display in the world, a title that brought international attention and cemented Madeira's reputation as one of the premier destinations for ringing in the new year. The show lasts approximately 8 minutes and launches from over 50 stations positioned around Funchal's natural amphitheatre, the bay surrounded by mountains. Fireworks explode from the hillsides, from boats in the harbour, from the waterfront, even from Porto Santo Island 60 kilometres away. The geography amplifies the spectacle. The mountains reflect the sound, creating a thunderous roar. The bay captures the light, with reflections shimmering on the water. And because the city wraps around the bay, viewers anywhere in Funchal have a view. Some better than others, but everyone sees something. Cruise ships anchor in the harbour specifically for the event, their decks packed with passengers. Hotels book up months in advance. Rooftop parties command premium prices. The waterfront promenade, Avenida do Mar, becomes packed with locals and tourists, dressed in festive clothing, toasting with champagne or Madeira wine as midnight approaches. At 11:40 p.m, a countdown spectacle begins on the Funchal Pier. Music, lights, performances, building anticipation. The crowd grows louder, more energetic. Then, at exactly midnight, the sky explodes. For 8 minutes, Funchal becomes the center of the world. Cascading waterfalls of light pour down the mountainsides. Bursts of color fill the sky, reds, golds, blues, greens, whites, in patterns and designs that showcase modern pyrotechnic artistry. The sound is overwhelming, a continuous rumble punctuated by cracks and booms that echo off the cliffs. The entire bay is illuminated, bathed in light reflected from above and below. And then it's over. Silence. Smoke drifting across the water. And the realization that you've just witnessed something unforgettable. The fireworks cost the regional government roughly €1 million each year, a massive expense that some question, particularly during economic downturns. But the tourism revenue generated is substantial. Hotels, restaurants, transportation, activities, all benefit from the influx of visitors who come specifically for New Year's Eve. The event has become part of Madeira's brand, a signature experience that distinguishes it from countless other destinations. Beyond the spectacle, it represents something deeper about the island's character. Madeira has always punched above its weight. A tiny island with a population under 250,000, producing world-renowned wine, preserving ancient forests, engineering miraculous water systems, and hosting globally recognized celebrations. It refuses to be defined by its size or isolation. That resilience has been tested repeatedly. In 2010, Madeira faced its worst natural disaster in decades. Torrential rains triggered catastrophic floods and mudslides that tore through Funchal and surrounding areas. Rivers of mud and debris swept through streets, destroying buildings, cars, infrastructure. At least 47 people died, hundreds were injured, thousands were displaced. The economic damage ran into hundreds of millions of euros. The disaster was a harsh reminder that living on a volcanic island in the middle of the Atlantic comes with risks. The steep terrain that makes Madeira beautiful also makes it vulnerable. When rainfall exceeds the soil's absorption capacity, water rushes downhill with devastating force. The narrow valley's funnel flows into torrents, and the extensive development in areas that were once natural drainage channels amplifies the damage. In response, Madeira invested heavily in flood prevention and emergency response infrastructure. Stream beds were reinforced, drainage systems were improved, early warning systems were established. The levada network was assessed and maintained to ensure it could handle extreme rainfall without failing or overflowing in ways that would worsen flooding. Emergency services received additional training and equipment. The 2010 floods also prompted reflection on tourism development. Madeira's economy has become increasingly dependent on tourism, which now accounts for a significant portion of regional GDP. Hotels and resorts have expanded across the island. Cruise ships dock regularly in Funchal, disgorging thousands of passengers for day visits. Short terms, rentals have proliferated, transforming residential neighborhoods. This growth brings prosperity, but also challenges. Housing prices have risen, making it difficult for locals, particularly young people, to afford homes. Traffic congestion has worsened, particularly in Funchal and on roads leading to popular attractions. Popular hiking trails have become crowded, sometimes uncomfortably so during peak season. The balance between preserving Madeira's character and accommodating growth is delicate. Environmental pressures compound the challenge. Climate change is altering rainfall patterns, making droughts more severe and storms more intense. Rising temperatures threaten the Laurisilva, potentially allowing invasive species to spread into higher elevations previously too cool for them. Ocean acidification and warming affect marine ecosystems around the island. Water demand continues to increase even as supply becomes less predictable. Yet Madeira continues to adapt, just as it always has. Renewable energy initiatives are expanding. The island generates a significant portion of its electricity from hydroelectric power, using the same levada system that irrigates the land. Wind farms on the highlands contribute additional clean energy. Solar installations are becoming more common. The goal is energy independence, reducing reliance on imported fossil fuels. Sustainable tourism initiatives are promoting low-impact activities, hiking, birdwatching, cultural experiences over mass tourism. Protected areas are being expanded and better managed. Visitor education programs teach respect for the environment. Local businesses are increasingly focused on quality over quantity, attracting travelers who want authentic experiences rather than superficial tours. The agricultural sector is diversifying. While bananas and wine remain important, farmers are experimenting with subtropical fruits, organic vegetables, and specialty crops for local markets. Young people are rediscovering traditional farming methods, combining them with modern sustainability practices. There's a growing movement to preserve heirloom varieties of fruits and vegetables unique to Madeira, genetic resources that could be lost if cultivation ceases. Cultural preservation efforts are strengthening as well. Traditional crafts, embroidery, wickerwork, wood carving are being promoted as both heritage and economic opportunity. Language programs are documenting Madeiran Portuguese dialect and expressions before they're lost to globalization. Festivals are maintained with careful attention to authenticity, avoiding the kind of commercialization that strips traditions of meaning. And the levadas continue to flow, maintained by workers who follow in the footsteps of convicts and farmers from centuries past. The position of levadero, the person responsible for managing water distribution, opening and closing gates, ensuring each property receives its allocated share, remains one of the oldest professions on the island. It requires intimate knowledge of the system, understanding how water moves through the network, anticipating problems before they occur. Walking the levadas today, you're following paths that have remained essentially unchanged for hundreds of years. The stone channels look the same as they did when hand-carved. The water flows with the same gentle current. The forests surrounding them harbor the same species that grew there before humans arrived. It's a rare experience in the modern world, engaging with infrastructure that's genuinely ancient, still functional, still essential, still beautiful. This is Madeira's gift, the ability to preserve while progressing, to honor the past while embracing the future, to remain small while thinking big. The island that began as an accident, explorers blown off course, stumbling upon land they weren't seeking, has become intentional in every way. Every levada was planned, every terrace was carved with purpose, every vine was planted deliberately, every tradition was preserved through conscious effort. Madeira is not paradise discovered, it's paradise created, maintained, defended against entropy and isolation and the thousand natural shocks that islands face. It's a reminder that the most extraordinary places are often those that refuse to accept their limitations, that turn obstacles into opportunities, that look at impossible geography and invent solutions that become legends. 600 miles from the nearest continent, rising from volcanic fire, cloaked in prehistoric forests, threaded with hand-carved waterways, producing wine that defies time itself, Madeira shouldn't exist the way it does. But it does. And that might be the most remarkable thing of all.